We're not elite sport. We have athletes that compete at a very high level, but we also have athletes that compete, very low ability athletes. So we're inclusive of all. We have athletes competing in triathlons, in marathons, in endurance sports. And we also have athletes competing in something we call motor activity training program, which would be for an athlete with real high support needs, and it might involve very basic motor skill type of tasks and activities. So our team, sport and competition, we have to make sure that we create a platform and an environment for all athletes to compete at the best of their ability, whatever their ability level is.
Hi, this is Rahul, and welcome to Sportingly Positive. Do you know Special Olympic World Games are scheduled to start in Berlin from 17 June? In fact, in this episode, we are going to talk about Special Olympics. Special Olympics is an international sport organization dedicated to providing year-round athletic training and competition for individuals with intellectual disabilities. Special Olympic embraces and empowers individuals with intellectual disabilities, fostering a sense of belonging, joy, and triumph that transcends physical limitation and touches the heart of everyone involved. The Special Olympic World Games is a flagship event that brings together thousands of athletes from around the globe to showcase their skills and celebrate the power of inclusion and sportsmanship. We will have a guest, Lou Lauria, Global Chief of Sport and Competition in Special Olympics. We are very grateful to Lou for taking some time out for this episode from his busy schedule. He will join us today directly from Berlin, where he and his team is getting ready for the Special Olympic World Games 2023, starting from 17 June. Before we start talking to Lou, please don't forget to subscribe to Time Out Talkies and hit the bell icon to stay updated. We bring in the positive stories from the world of sports. Hi Lou, welcome to Sportingly Positive. So
Thank
how
you
are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me, Rahul. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Okay. So here, we are having this conversation because I want to bring, I want more people to know about Special Olympics, give people an idea in a broad sense about Special Olympics. So my first question to you would be could you provide an overview of Special Olympic Games and their significance to the world of sport?
Absolutely. So I can give you a little bit of the history. So the games started, the Kennedy family, President Kennedy and his family in the U.S., political dynasty for decades. President Kennedy had a sister named Eunice Kennedy Shriver. He also had another sister named Rosemary, who had an intellectual disability back then. And Mrs. Shriver was passionate that her sister be able to compete in everything and to be part of the family and to be inclusive. And this was in the 1950s and 60s when it was a different situation for women. So she was always a fighter, a very tough and remarkable woman. So when she had the opportunity, she started a camp basically at her home in Maryland. And in the summer, she would bring, back then, which were in the U.S. institutions and group homes, and she would bring people with intellectual disabilities to her house for a camp. And they would do sport. They had a swimming pool, and they rode horses, and they played all other sports and everything. And there was a woman in Chicago doing work on people with intellectual disability as part of the Parks Department. And Ann Burke, who was a young student just out of university, working with people with disabilities in this Chicago Parks Department, wanted to do an event, and she reached out to Eunice, and they got together. And in 1968, at Soldier Field in Chicago, we had our first World Games. It was Canada and the U.S. It was largely U.S. with some Canadian athletes at Soldier Field, which is a big American football stadium and very iconic in the city of Chicago. So that was our first World Games, and we quickly grew from there, predominantly in the U.S. up until 2003. When we took our event outside the U.S. to Dublin, Ireland for the first international World Games, and we've pretty much been out of the U.S. ever since. We've been to Shanghai, we've been to Abu Dhabi, we've been to Athens, Greece, we were in Los Angeles, The future is more international, but the programs, just I guess going back as to how we're structured, we have 7 regional offices, so the world is broken up into 7 regions, and there are national programs in about 200 countries, and the regions manage the national programs on a day-to-day basis, along with headquarters. So we're all connected. But the programs do sport work, which I think everybody knows about. But we also do a magnificent amount of work in healthcare and in education and in leadership. So we have some other really good programmatic areas that are growing. We also have a concept called unified sport, which we'll have here in Berlin. And unified sport is where an athlete, let's say a footballer, is paired up on a team with people without intellectual disabilities, and it's all based on the level of their sporting ability. So it has nothing to do with intellectual disabilities, not having intellectual disabilities. It's all about the level you play football. And that's been a great tool that started in Connecticut probably 30 years ago now. And that's been a great tool for getting people in, an inclusive mindset and getting people working together and practicing and training together and competing together and then going out for a meal or something after practice. So, yeah, I think that was a long answer, but.
That's actually a great concept. So, can you just tell us how different is Special Olympics from other sporting events?
Sure, I can because I've worked, my career has been in the Olympic movement, in the Paralympic movement, and now in the Special Olympics movement. So we're not elite sport. We have athletes that compete at a very high level, but we also have athletes that compete, very low ability athletes. So we're inclusive of all. Before the pandemic, we had about 6 million athletes and unified partners globally, and that ranges from everything. We have athletes competing in triathlons, in marathons, in endurance sports. And we also have athletes competing in something we call motor activity training program, which would be for an athlete with real high support needs, and it might involve very basic motor skill type of tasks and activities. So our team, Sport and Competition, we have to make sure that we create a platform and an environment for all athletes to compete at the best of their ability, whatever their ability level is.
So what are some key goals and objectives of the Special Olympic Games?
Absolutely. So here in Berlin 2023, their legacy was largely devised by the athletes as the bid was, and the goals are around strengthening the national program throughout Germany, so the sub-programs. There are also goals around the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The German government utilizes Special Olympics Germany to move those goals forward. There are goals around education and growing the number of schools. And then our healthcare program, Healthy Athletes, which is a fantastic program, will help train medical professionals in Germany to work with people with intellectual disabilities, and that leaves a nice legacy as well. And then the other thing they want to do is raise the brand awareness. The brand awareness in Germany is about 7%, and they're hoping after the games, the brand awareness grows to 25 or 30%, which it should. They're going to have absolutely outstanding media coverage and broadcast coverage here in Germany.
And just outside Germany, like objectives internationally?
Sure. So objectives internationally outside of Germany are largely around media and brand awareness. We have very high brand awareness in the U.S. Outside of the U.S., we're not as well known. So we have a partnership now with the EBU. So we'll have a very large footprint of broadcast with the EBU. We've got ESPN is our global broadcaster, and they do some distribution outside the U.S. So we're, again, trying to grow brand awareness for the work that we do. And then each of the programs will have goals as to what they're trying to achieve by bringing a delegation. They'll bring guests, they'll bring ministers, and try and raise awareness in their own community and try and build new relationships that could lead to new partnerships, new sources of funding.
And can you describe the process of selecting a host city for the Special Olympic Games?
Absolutely, it's a great question, and we just revised the process. So I've been in this role about 6.5 years. Prior to that, I was in the Olympic and Paralympic movements, and we've revised our bidding to be more of a dialogue phase, similar to what the IOC is doing and similar to what World Rugby is doing, obviously on a much more limited scale. But we're now getting out in front of the bidding process with these dialogue phases that are basically individual dialogues with bidders who are We want to work on the concept. We want to work on the why. So many places you understand the how, like with Berlin, we knew how they would do it. It's a world capital. They have the infrastructure, no problem. But we wanted to cultivate the why and the legacy. So we spent a lot of time in that phase. And then we work on the funding model. So what's the funding model going to look like in one country versus another country? And then we get to a point where we do a feasibility study, and then they can begin the bid, and we're there to support them the whole way as they create the bid. So we're not on fixed timelines like it was in the old days. A bit like the IOC, a bit like World Rugby, the timelines are more fluid, and you go from a non-exclusive dialogue to an exclusive dialogue once somebody has the funding and you move forward with them.
So what are the various sporting events included in Special Olympic Games?
Sure. So we have the World Games, which here is 26 sports, 7,000 athletes, and it's all the typical type of sports you'd expect: cycling, table tennis, judo, basketball, volleyball, swimming, athletics. So it's all of that. Outside of the World Games, we have single sport events. We have the Unified Cup, which is a football or soccer event. We just had our second one in Detroit, Michigan in 2022, and we look to have our third one in 2026. We have a tennis event, an international tennis event, and we're getting ready to launch a basketball 3-on-3 event. So we're in dialogue now for potential hosts there. We also have a nice dance sport event. So dance is a new sport for us. We had our first world championship in Austria, and we're looking at another event there as well.
So how many countries are participating in Berlin 2023?
180.
180. Okay, that's a good number actually. I mean, it's close to Olympic Games. So that's a real good number. And how do athletes qualify to participate in the Special Olympic Games?
It'll vary, but largely off of the national games, and they'll take the top two. So it's a process where the programs or the national programs will request quota. There's a quota allocated by region. So Asia Pacific may get X number of slots for athletics, X number of slots for swimming, X number of slots for tennis. And then the programs request quota, and then the programs identify the athletes as part of that process. They'll take, let's say, the top two athletes at a national games, and they'll qualify through. But it's done differently in different countries.
Okay. And can you just elaborate on what ways do Special Olympic Games promote inclusion and empowerment?
Absolutely. So we do a lot of, on the empowerment side, it's a lot about athlete leadership. It's a lot about opportunities. We're going to have, this is actually interesting, in Berlin, we'll have 54 54 people with intellectual disabilities will be sport officials. We'll have an assistant technical delegate be a sport official. And so we are constantly promoting opportunities for athletes to be coaches, for athletes to be officials, to take leadership roles within sport. And they do that with outside of sport as well. We have a whole athlete leadership program that teaches people to advocate, to empower, whether it be in school or the workplace or, this type of thing. And then what was the other part of that question? What makes us unique?
Yeah, no, inclusion and empowerment. So I think you spoke about it. Yeah.
Right.
So, and in fact, it's quite inspiring that you have, beyond athletes, like you are also empowering the umpires and referees or the sports officials. So that's really quite encouraging for anybody with intellectual disability. So that's a real good thing, I would say.
Yeah, and a lot of that, just on that real quick, we've got a whole roster of sport partners. We have the BWF, the Badminton World Federation, which is a fantastic partner of ours. And they did a lot of work in Abu Dhabi around the 2019 games around training our badminton players to be officials. And there's a legacy from that. We work with the FIVB, we work with FIBA, and then these international partnerships trickle down to the national level. And again, they help facilitate the growth of our sport, because if you're the National Badminton Federation of India, all you want is more people playing badminton. So if we're playing badminton, it's just more people with rackets in their hands playing.
Absolutely. So, can you share some inspiring stories or example of athletes who have participated in Special Olympic Games?
Absolutely. There's a couple that I think of. I mean, there's a couple of people that I work with that are inspiring. There's a woman, Loretta Claiborne, who'll be almost 70 years old. She's competing in tennis here, and she is on our board of directors. She has a role within the organization as chief inspiration officer. She's run the marathon. She's run marathons. She qualified for Boston. She's a black belt in karate. Does athletics, leads a full life, has met presidents and world leaders, traveled around the world speaking. She's absolutely inspirational, and it's an absolute honor that I get to be with her. And then we have other situations. We have there's an athlete out of Indiana, Andrew Peterson. Andrew had fetal alcohol syndrome and came into this world in a pretty bad place, a pretty tough place from a disability perspective. And through athletics and through competing in Special Olympics, you've watched him grow and emerge, and he was nonverbal, and now he speaks and give lectures at school. He coaches other athletes. It's probably one of my favorite stories. ESPN did a nice piece on him, and then we have other stories as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a great movement.
Yeah, this fantastic. These are two fantastic stories which you just said right now. So, I mean, great stories. So, what kind of impact do Special Olympic Games have on individuals with intellectual disabilities and their communities?
Yeah, I think it's about visibility, right? Like this group of individuals was marginalized, they were put away and not to be seen, and still in some countries there's still a struggle. But whether they were in institutions, in the U.S. that's how it was, and to get people to understand, and the spectrum of people with intellectual disabilities is very is vast too. So there are times when it's very apparent, and there are times when it's not very apparent. You could be talking to somebody that has an intellectual disability, and it's barely perceptible. So I think just the empathy, the understanding. I think as a society, people are moving to more of this inclusive type of place. Workplaces are accommodating people. You're finding more people with intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities being hired for roles. Schools, we do a great job in unified schools, where and that's a great legacy coming out of Abu Dhabi, where they help fund the growth of unified schools, where people with intellectual disabilities and without intellectual disabilities go to school together. They do all the social activities, all the sport activities. So we're expanding that outside the U.S. We've got a very robust program in the U.S., and I think it's helping bring another generation of kids up who now know, oh no, that's my classmate. He's not supposed to be in an institution or shut away. We have lunch together, or we play tennis together, or. So I think you're seeing the change of a generation through schools.
That's a great job you're doing, actually. So, Special Olympic movement evolved over the years, and what are the future plans of the organization? I mean, going forward.
Yeah, I think for us, if I look at sport and competition, we're focused a lot on improving the quality of sport and the impact of sports. And we say improving the quality, sometimes people take that to mean, oh, you're just going to focus on the higher performing athletes, but we want to improve the quality and the athlete experience for all the athletes. So we're doing a lot of work around sport impact and how we can have officials and coaches that are better trained, and have more coaches and more capacity, and work closely with our sport partners to improve the athlete experience. Because everything that you can learn in sport that's applicable in life, whether it's leadership or fitness or social inclusion or being on a team, there's a lot of these attributes that, if sport is delivered properly, you could really maximize these attributes. So for us, it's that, and it's growth on the international side, growing our awareness on the international side, which again, our sport partners do. When we look at the FIBAs and the FIVBs and the BWFs and the ITF and all of them, they all help to amplify our brand, on the national level with the national federations and on the international level. So for us, that's the catalyst to quality sport and also raising our profile as an organization internationally.
And now coming to Berlin 2023, like if somebody wants to watch the Special Olympic Games, I mean, is there any channel covering
They
it?
did something very interesting. They put together a media alliance So you had sport channels and TV channels that were competing against each other normally. They all came together to form this alliance in Berlin to perform this, you put on this broadcast. So it was one, again, taking competitors. They realized, hey, we can all work together on this and we can all lift this movement up within Germany, which has been great.
Yeah, that's fantastic, actually. That's really fantastic. And from Berlin 2023, do you have any message for our viewers on Special Olympic Games?
Yeah, I would say it's just to understand that we're a movement like the Olympic movement and the Paralympic movement, that we're growing, that we can always use help. There's a tremendous amount of value in volunteering, or if you're looking to start your career, it's an excellent opportunity to start a career in sports. We're always looking for young, talented people just coming out of university, and yeah, we have a lot to offer, and we give back a lot too. I think if you spend some time, you'll learn a lot from the athletes. And there's a lot of good value. And I think people are looking for that now more in their jobs, looking for a way that the ethos of what they're doing and how they're contributing. So we're definitely an avenue for that. So yeah, get involved
That's great.
locally.
So thank you, Lou, for talking to Sportingly Positive, and I wish you all the best, and all the athletes competing in Special Olympics all the best. So have a great Berlin 2023.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Thanks for having me. An absolute pleasure. I'm glad we were able to find some time.